Okay, welcome everybody. We have a new participant, Shamai. Welcome to the class.
Thank you.
Sure. Um, so we're starting here with the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Kuf Gimel, um, and I'll start us off. I'll start us off. This is all based on what we saw last week, especially the Rashba. It's going to have a major effect on the halacha here and the Gemaras that we saw. Okay, kol davar shetamo pagum. Eino oser tarov tov. ואפילו אין טעמו פגום מחמת עצמו, שבפני עצמו הוא מותם, הוא משובח, אלא שפוגם טרופתו מותר. So we say anything that's pagum, that has a bad flavor, it doesn't cause a tarovet to be asur, because we're really interested in having hana'ah from the isser. And if you don't have hana'ah from the isser, then then the tarovet is mutter, assuming that it's, we're going to see it later, assuming that it's majority heter, at least according to the Rashba. Um, and then he says another thing, which is that if it's good, but it ruins the food, the Isser is essentially good, but in the Tarot it's bad, then it's also mutter. What's the example in the Gemara that we saw of that? Or in the Mishnah, I think.
Yayin Nesach falling on the grapes.
Yeah, that may be, but there's a better example, really much more clear.
No, this is the vinegar with the lentils.
Exactly. The vinegar, yeah, I don't know if you said grisim. I think grisim in modern
Greasy
Hebrew,
grapes.
grisim is more like barley, but
Okay.
I think. But yeah, right. Vinegar in barley. So the vinegar is good, but nobody wants vinegar in their barley. Okay. Haga. Mihu dvarim hachashuvim kibiria okiyotze behen im enam pogmim ba'atzman אף על פי שפוגמים התבשיל, אינם בטלים אפילו באלף. We're going to talk about this a bit, but this is talking about a biria, which we learned before, Siman Meya, right? Siman Kuf. Um, so a biria and any other dvar chashuv, if it's not itself asur, and as we just said, that things that are not themselves asur, like vinegar, could also be mutter in a tarovet. But here, if it's not itself asur, a pagum, it's a good tasting chaticha, even if this chaticha, the chaticha chashuva, or this biria, falls into something that ruins the thing, it ruins the new tarovet because of this thing. It's still not batel because the biria itself is good. Why? What's the rationale for that? What was the rationale for that? Why don't we say just like everything else? If the birya or the chaticha ruya litchabed falls into something that ruins it, ruins the tarovet, the birya's interaction or the chaticha's interaction with the tarovet ruins the tarovet, so it should be mutter because you're not having any benefit from it. Why? Why did we? What's the rationale for this? Okay, Max.
That its importance is still there and it still has Shem Isser? That
Yeah.
hasn't
Okay.
been because it hasn't been cut up or anything, it still has Shem Isser.
Right. Okay. But why don't we say by every piece that it's Shemus or Zalav? I want a stronger rationale.
Yeah.
Eitan, what do you say?
Think it's because these things are Eino Batel Afil Ba'elef, whereas
Right.
other things might be Batel Bashishin.
And what does that tell us? Because it's not Batul Elf. What does that tell us about the concern about these things?
What do you mean?
In other words, what
Oh,
because why is it? In other words, what is the Torah or the rabbis? What are they concerned with
not
if they're
taste.
telling us that it's not Batul Elf?
Meaning any amount of its flavor, period, is bad. And so even if it's leaf gum, we don't want it in the food.
Okay. But say it even stronger. You said any amount of its flavor. Can you say it even stronger? Ari?
It's not taste at all. It's almost like going back to the thinking with Min Bimino.
Right.
We can't be concerned about taste at all. It's any spec.
Exactly. Exactly. If they're saying it's even in Aleph, we don't care. Then they don't care about flavor. They care about the thing is there. As long as it's there, I'm not allowing this tarobah. And it doesn't matter. We don't concern ourselves with flavor because if it's 1 in 1,000, there's no flavor detectable, and yet they still ushered it. So therefore, don't tell me that because the flavor is corrupting my tarovet, it should be mutter. But this particular item, we don't care about its flavor effect. Even if it has no flavor effect, it's usher. So we're not going to give a heter just because the flavor effect is bad. That's the rationale. Maybe we'll see that inside. Actually, I want to. There's one Taz that the first Taz here I didn't assign, but it actually is a very nice summary a little bit. So let's look at this first Taz. It says Shatam Pagum. This is on the Machaber. Before we get to the Biria case, we're just talking about the general din. Shatamo Pagum. So he says, that was again, Kol Davar Shatamo Pagum Eno Oser Trovto. So he says, Denoten Tam Lifgab Mutter. Oh, because Noten Tam Lifgab is Mutter. The Alfinan La Meger. Because we learned it from Ger, that pasuk. The Ketiv Lo Tochal Kol Nevela Leger Asher B'Sharecha Titnena. You should give the nevela, the carcass, to the goy, the ger toshav, asher b'sharecha titnena. Nevela haruya leger karuya nevela v'sheina haruya leger lo. Anything, it's only called a nevela when it's ra'ui leger, when it's something you would actually eat or give to a Gentile to eat. So anything that's pagum itself is pagum is not considered a nevela, and therefore not considered isur. This is the Gemara that we saw. Umishum haki kola isurim b'tarovet b'tarovet harov v'haheter kola isurim sheb'tarovet harov v'haheter mu'at have ki'ilu hu b'fnei atzmo ve'ein lo heter ad shiyeh nifgam legamrei kenevela she'ena rui leger. So he says any kol sha'isur b'tarovet is the rov. Whenever the majority is the isur, then you need it to be pagum legamre, that you wouldn't even eat it. That's the first part. If it's pagum legamre, in other words, if the majority, then obviously it's going to be mutter because the majority is isser, but the isser is pagum intention itself. So then it's mutter. Therefore, we need that stricture that it's totally inedible. Aval kol shene'asar machmat tarovto is. But anything that's usher because of a tarovet, machmat tarovot isser, hen be'isser sheyesh bo mamish ubatel berov heter. Whether there's an isser that's just batel berov because there's a majority of heter, hen be'isser she'eno mamash, or whether it's flavor, el noten tam. It just giving flavor, right? It's not mamash, just giving flavor. Af she'ein rov haheter. Even if the majority is isser, but it's just tam, it's not actual physical substance, but it's still majority. We'll talk about that more later. Dai lo im yeh nifgam ktsat. It's enough that the isser should be a little bit nifgam, because the majority, after all, is heter in this case. Ktsat. Dai lo im yeh nifgam ktsat oto hatarovet. If it will ruin the tarovet a little bit. Daha lo neheneh me'at tarovet. Oh, and here's the concept. Because you're not benefiting from the tarovet. Shum tam. In other words, shalom, again, daha lo neheneh me'at tarovot shum tam. In other words, the tam that is there from the isser is not a beneficial tam. And so I'm not really getting any benefit from it, and the whole concern is benefit. That's what we're going to see in Sif Bet, that it says that the pagam doesn't have to be a full pagam. Okay, I thought that's a very nice Taz because he kind of summarizes the whole thinking of the Gemara that we saw. Yeah? Any reactions? Okay, so
Just the Taz is like the Rashba, right?
you're saying as far as the explanation,
Yeah, just insofar
yeah,
as he's saying, yeah.
I think you're right. Yeah, he's like the Rashba. He's going by majority. For sure, he's going by majority, which is the Rashba, and not by. But he's also a little bit like the Ran because he's talking about Hana'ah, and the Ran had that strong emphasis on Hana'ah because he was saying, if you benefit more from the size, then it's not going to be mutter. So the idea of Hana'ah is for sure also Meshutaf is also in the divrei in the words of the Ran. Okay. Um, let's look at Shach Aleph. Here, maybe Ori, you want to read Shach Aleph?
Okay. Kibiria okay otseba. Kegon I'm lost on this. Roshi Tevot.
Haticha ruya litchabed.
חתיכה ראויה להתכבד, ודבר שמניין, וכי high gavna. Just like all of those cases that we said are not batal. Degufo lo batil be'elef, because those things are not batal even in 1,000. Afilu eno noten tam, even if it's not giving any flavor. Hilkach tzarich shiyu pgumim be'atzmam. Therefore, they need to be ruined on their own. They need to be bad completely on their own.
Right.
The ayin.
In other words, he's saying that if they are in the if let's say a small bird falls into my soup, but the bird is pagum itself, it's a rotten bird, then there's no problem. The only problem is if it's in a tarovet and it's good, but the bird falling in my soup sort of ruins my tarovet. So I might say, oh, it's batel because it ruined my tarovet. But the bird itself was good, so then it's considered a birya still, and it's going to be ruined, and therefore it won't be the whole taro will be usher. The whole taro will be usher because it's got a good bird in it. Only if the bird itself is bad, it's not. We can't. Remember, there's two basic ways that we talk about pagam. One is that the thing that's falling in itself is pagam, and in that case, birya, if it's itself pagam, would be the taro would be mutter. And the second is the thing falls in good, like the vinegar case. But its tarovet, its effect on the mixture is bad. That heter we don't have by birya. The thing itself has to be pagum. Okay.
But it's still a chiddush. It's still overriding normal birya because of its being pagum.
Yeah, right. We saw
If it's truly
that.
pagum.
We saw the rationale for that, and that's what one of the people here said now, which is that once it's not chashuv anymore. Once it's pagum, it's even though it's a full bird, but it's pagum. The whole reason why birya is usher is because it's so chashuv, because it's a whole thing, so it's chashuv, it's important. But once it's sour, then it's no longer important. All right, so let's. I want to look now. I'm going to skip to the Darkei Moshe in the Shulchan Aruch. I mean, in the tour. Sorry, in the tour. So go to the tour, and we're actually going to look a little bit at the Beit Yosef for a second, because the Darkei Moshe is talking about the Beit Yosef. So it's the tour, probably on the page with Halacha Zion. But in my edition, it has an aleph in the Beit Yosef. It has aleph parentheses bet. In other words, even though we're over here in the tour in Halacha Zion, the Beit Yosef is actually for aleph is actually referring to stuff that is in Siman is Sif aleph.
This is on the Rashba, right? Katava Rashba Yireli Dehad
Yeah, Katava Rashba Yireli. Thank you, Joel. Yes, Katava Rashba Yireli. Tell me if you found that. But actually, I want to skip the first half and start where it says Katuv B'Orchot Chayim. There's a small little piece, really. The whole thing, the whole aleph there is very small, but it says Katuv B'Orchot Chayim B'Shem Harav Rabbeinu Shem Tov Palko. Everyone sees that? Yeah, you got it? Okay, I see your Jacob, I see your thumb. Good. Okay, so let's go from there. So Ketuv Orchot Chayim b'Shem Harav Rabbeinu Shem Tov Palko. Ein Omrim Noten Tam Lifgam Mutar Ela be'Isser Shehu Batel B'Shishim. It's only by an Isser that's Batel B'Shishim. Wow. Aval Isser Shetzarich Shiur Gadol Mizeh Kigon Biria V'Tarovot Afilu Pagum Asur. So here he argued, I mean, this is obviously before the Shach saw this, obviously, right? This is much earlier than the Shach, but he's saying, no, I disagree. Even if it's Pagum, it's Asur. Ubetur Orachayim, Siman Taf Mem Zayin. So Siman Taf Mem Zayin in Orachayim is about Chametz on Pesach. And there it's Nitbaer, She'en Dat Rav Poskim came. In other words, that the poskim hold that if it's pagum, sorry, it's asur. I mean, it's mutar. Sorry, I'm confusing you by switching the words. The poskim there say that if it's pagum, then it's mutar. But this rabbi says, the Orchot Chaim quotes the Rav Shem Tov Palcho, and he says, no, if it's pagum, it's asur. Don't tell me there's no such thing as pagum no such thing at all by pagum. There's no pagum and no pogem, right? Not pagum in the sense that if it is itself asur, and no pogem if it in terovat. It's always asur. And that comes the Darkei Moshe. And again, in the Darkei Moshe Gimel, I want to skip the first half and go to the two dots where it says Od Ketab Isser V'Heter. You see that? Everyone got that? So he says, Od Ketab Isser V'Heter Ha'aruch Klal.
Where are you reading?
I'm reading in the Darkei Moshe Gimel, but the second half of Gimel, where after there's a colon in the middle, and then it starts Od Katav. You know, Isaac, you got that? Od Katav Isser V'Heter.
Ah, okay, got it. Od Katav, yes.
You have it now, sorry.
Od Katav Isser V'Heter. Haroch. Klal Lamed Bet. Da Afilu Biria Oshar Dvarim Chashuvim. Now here you have I think you have a change in the text. Joel, you have a change in the text here? It should be, you have two texts. The correct reading is Pigumim. Not Noten Tam Lifgam, but Pigumim. So let's read it again. He says, Da'afilu biria oshar devarim chashuvim, im hem pigumim, hem b'teilim. If you're pagum itself, then it's batel. B'teilim shapir. It is batel. Berov. In other words, as long as there's rov, and if the thing itself is pagum ba'atzmo, it's batel. The me'achar sha'isr pagum, even though it's a biria or devar chashuv, me'achar sha'isr pagum, batel shivutan. It's lost its importance. That's what we were saying all along, but now we see it written. Aval im hem chashuvim ba'atzmam. In other words, it's not pagum itself. But it puts bad flavor into the food, into the tarovet. Then it's not patela im eno mikira. If you don't know where it is, of course, if you know where it is, what should you do? Take it out. You can take it out, and then you only have flavor of it, and then it actually would be batel. But if the actual little bird that fell in, is still there, as long as the bird itself is good, even if the bird ruins whatever I'm cooking, I can't eat what I'm cooking. I can't eat what I'm cooking. But if I pull it out, then the flavor, if it gives bad flavor, it would be batel. In other words, it's considered as if it gives tam lishvach, even though. So that's that distinction that we're seeing between pagum and pogem. Now I want to look at the Chavotat. So we're just getting into this question of Birya. So does everyone know where the Chavotat is? It's I think I may have sent it out in the sources, but it's also at the end of your book. I think it's in the source sheet. Chavotat Gimel. It's the very end it's the very end, not the very end. There's Yalkutim at the very end, but there's that before that you have a Chavotat. I don't know if you got it. I mean, yeah, good. I mean, so far everything is pretty clear. If it's pagum, then it's butter. If it's pogam, but it's itself is not pagum, then it's asur. Except for that one opinion of Rabbi Shem Tov Palko, who said that it's always asur. Let's see what the Chavodat says. Everyone there? Yeah, Eitan, you got it. Shammai. Okay, so it says like this: Pigumim ba'atzmam, aval pogmim pigumim ba'atzmam afilu nitkalkel rak tzat batel chashivutahu ve'en tzarich sheyufsad legamrei. So he says like this: if the whole reason that when it's pagum by itself, it ceases to be a birya, then when it's pagum by itself, then what level of pagum do we need? It's enough that it's a little bit pagum. The bird doesn't have to be a rancid bird, it just has to be a little bit pagum, because once it's even a little bit pagum, it's no longer in the category of really a birya anymore, because it's not chashuv anymore. So he says the level is only ktsat. So he's introducing a new level here. It's not like either it's inedible or it's good, but there's a middle level. He writes about this ant that got ruined. I guess if you're a connoisseur of ants, you can tell the difference. After lake, even though you are whipped, in other words, you're punished by the Torah because you ate a namala. Mikol makom batel, but it's batel if it's in a tarovet. Ube nisrecha legamre, and if it would be fully ruined, that ant, lo laki, then you wouldn't get whipped. So you see, there's two categories. It could be a little bit nisrach, and then you don't. It's not a. You still. It's still a Torah prohibition for eating it, but it's batel. Mikol makom batel, and only if it's nisrach legamre lo laki, and then you're not. Then it's also you're not whipped. K'moshe katuv hamagid mishnah berambam beperak yudalid milchot malachot asirot ela vadai de bepagam muat batel chashivut habirya. This is very interesting. I don't know if Joel, did we discuss this when we discussed birya?
Yeah, the Aruch HaShulchan uses this actually to try to, right, in his world, people have flour that's very buggy and they're not checking very carefully, and he uses this as a way to justify it actually. So
In other words, they're
we discussed
pagum
it
a
a little
little
bit.
bit.
Yeah.
This has to be a little bit, and then, well, according to this, is not quite a full justification for that, because this is saying it's in a Torah, but it's in a tarovet. You're saying,
Yes.
as long as you didn't see the ant, maybe you didn't eat it. All right. Vapri chadash. Wait a second. So a pri chadash. Now you can't get better than if the pri chadash argues with the Chavotat, because they're the two most really harif commentaries. The Chavotat is very harif, and the pri chadash is even more harif. So vapri chadash choleka hamagid mishnah v'katav dvarim ha'mu'usim shenisrechu. So he says things that are mu'usim and they're ruined, they're soured up. Shenis lokin aleihem. Even if it's fully ruined, you get whipped on it. Right? Even if it's completely ruined, you should get whipped on it, because it's still a birya, he says. Don't tell me chashivutan. He says, no, you should get whipped on it. Ve'eno nira. But says the Chavodat ve'eno nira. Ge'im kain af noten tam livgam litaser bahu. Because if that would be the case, then also when they give a bad flavor into a tarovet, they should be aser. Daha noten tam livgam in nevela. We learned the whole din of noten tam from the din of nevela that you give to a goy. She'ena ru'i lager. Nafka. Sorry, I should have read that all together. We learn it all from this nevela she'ena ru'i lager nafka. V'kevan dehai kra lo koi ashratzim. Af noten tam livgam litaser. And if what you're, in other words, what the this is the way I understand it. What the Pri Chadash is saying is that there's no din of pagum by shratzim, by shratzim. And if you're telling, and that's why even if it's nisrach lagamre, there's no din of pagum by it. The din of pagum doesn't chal on it. So if you're telling me that the din doesn't chal on it, then you must be saying that the drasha of the ger titnena doesn't apply to shratzim. But if that's the case, then af noten tam livgam litaser. Then when they give flav, then you have no source for any kind of pagam din. And then you're going to tell me that even if it gives a bad flavor to something else and I remove it fully, it should be aser because I can taste that sour bird here, even if I removed it. Noten tam livgam. But we have the Gemara tells us for sure that there is a din of noten tam by the flavor of shratzim. So if there's a din by the flavor of shratzim, that there's a din of noten tam livgam, then it has to also be that by the essence, by the actual item, it's aser. Because you can't have it both. You can't have it halfway. Either you take the drasha or you don't take the drasha. And if you take the drasha, in order to get the concept of tam, then you have to take the drasha also regarding if it's nisrach lagamre. So that's a pretty good argument against the Pri Chadash. I'm sorry, I like the Pri Chadash, but it seems like Chavodat wins here. Questions?
Can you review who said what there? Because I got lost on which side the Pri Chadash was saying, because he was arguing on the Magid Mishnah. So at the beginning of the chain, I got a little backwards.
I'm getting towards let's just re-summarize the last part. The last part is that the Pri Chadash holds that there's no din at all of that when a sheretz or a birya is nisrach legamre, it's still asur and you still get whipped by the Torah, because if you eat a sheretz, the Torah says don't eat a birya. By the way, this only makes sense by a birya because by chaticha ru'i litchabed, it's only din rabbanan. But by birya, if you would eat a birya, then it would be an Isser Torah, and you would get whipped. But what if that birya, that let's say a whole bird or something like that, a non-kosher bird, then if you ate the whole thing, then you would get whipped, even if it's sour, even if it's like totally not ro'ui la'achila. Because what does the Pri Chadash say? The Torah says don't eat a birya. So it doesn't care whether it's a good birya or a bad birya. It says don't eat a birya. And then he must. So the Chavodah says, if you're telling me that, then you must be holding that the din of nevela ru'i lager doesn't apply to it, because ru'i lager, nevela ru'i lager says only a nevela that's good are you whipped on. So you're telling me birya is different. Nevela is one thing, birya is different. So then how? So then it must be according to you, Pri Chadash, that the tam of the birya also would be aser, because how do we learn that tam that's lifgam is mutter? Only from nevela. But if you're telling me the din of nevela doesn't apply to birya, then there's no way to learn that the tam is. And yet I have a Gemara that says the tam is batel by a birya when it's pagum. So it can't be, and it must be that we do apply the din of nevela to birya, and therefore, if a birya is bad itself, it must be mutter. So that's sort of rejects the Pri Chadash and rejects the Shem Tov, the Rabbeinu Shem Tov Palko also, and that gives us back to the halacha.
Question:
Yeah.
Why doesn't the logic of no hana'a no benefit applied to birya shenisracha legamrei. If we say that our logic was until
Oh, you're saying according to the Pri Chadash. Again, the Chabad Das
yeah.
agrees with you. Yes, it does apply, and therefore would be batil. But according to Pri Chadash, he says, what's his logic? He says, because the Torah doesn't care about chashivut. The Torah just says, don't eat a birya, any kind of birya. There's once the Torah said, don't eat it, and it doesn't say, well, it's no longer a birya just because it's rotten. It's still a birya. And the argument in favor of that is to say like this: the Torah says, don't eat a fly. Well, flies, can I tell the difference between a ma'us fly and a not a ma'us fly? To me, all flies are ma'usim. All flies are pretty bad. So if the Torah says don't eat it, even though it's bad, must be that becoming more bad doesn't have any change on its status. Wait, Joel, and then no.
Yeah, I know. Part of the debate might be the question of, is the chashivut of birya the reason that you get malkot for it, or is the fact you get malkot what defines the chashivut? In other words, why is it you get malkot? Because the Torah said, and that defines the chashivut that leads to say birya is not batel, or is it you get malkot because it's chashuv, and that's the same reason the rabbis made a gezerah that it's batel? Those are, like which motivates which factor.
Okay,
So,
very interesting, very good, thank you. Very interesting. Noah.
I just want to clarify. It seems like he's saying that a birya that's pagum lagamre is actually mutar lachila, not just you're not lash, but mutar. Is that right? Rav Joel says yes. That's I'm willing to live with
Well,
he did say it. He said it. I closed the chavotat, but he said at the beginning, didn't he?
no, he said sheyufsad legamre, and he says he quotes the Orchot Chaim, and he says shekatab nemalash nisracha aftalaki. You are whipped for it. Mikol
Yeah,
makom batel.
But that's
keep going.
Ubenisracha
Keep going.
legamre lo laki.
oh yes, right.
And then
Yeah.
if it's fully, that's if it's ksat. And if it's fully, then lo laki. That's different from saying it's mutter to eat. You just the Torah from the Torah.
Fair.
Maybe that's what you asked.
Yeah.
From the Torah's perspective, it's mutter to eat. Could be that it's not mutter to eat, but you're not whipped. It could even be that complicated. It's complicated actually because birria has a
You think it
special
could be
din.
like? You think it could be like
That's
chatzi
shear.
shear?
Birria
Yeah.
has a special din. If you eat one ant by birria, then you get whipped, even though it's not a kazayat. So it could be that if it's na'us, it no longer becomes a kazayat. It no longer becomes birria, but it's still a category of this. No, but no, you wouldn't get whipped. You wouldn't get whipped because of the drasha of nevela rui lager. It's not rui lager. So if it's ma'us lagamar, yeah, you won't get whipped, and it would be mutter.
You're saying it would be mutar?
It would be mutter according to Torah. Yeah. So now that I worked it out in my head, yeah, it would be mutter according to the Torah. According to the Torah, I don't know if there'd be a rabbinic. Probably the rabbis didn't get involved with that question, gezerah. But all right, I think I'll skip the gra. But we see this sort of back and forth about whether a birria that's ma'us is pogem. Okay, let's go back to the Shulchan Aruch. You go back to the Shulchan Aruch. Kuf Gimel Sif Bet. Josie, maybe you'll read Sif Bet.
Sure thing. Hagam ze ein tzarich שיפגום לגמרי עד שיקץ לאכול, אלא אפילו פוגם קצת אינו אסר ta'arov אותו. So something that is that we're this type of pagam, it doesn't have to be completely spoiled or pagum until it is you can't eat it at all. Rather, even if it's just a little bit pogam. it doesn't forbid admixtures with it. ויש מי שאומר דהיינו דווקא כשנתערב איסור מועט עד, sorry, im heter murabeh. But there's someone who says that that this, if it's that dafka shnitariv isur mu'at, if you add a little bit of isur into it, in a large amount of heter, that's the only case that this works. Aval isur merubeh letoch heter mu'at va'afilu mechatze al mechatze ein omrim noten ta'am nivgam mutar ad shivgum legamre. So if it's
Who
only a
says
little,
that? Whose opinion is that we saw earlier? He says Yesh Misha Omer, but we know who that is. Who is that?
I want to say it's the Rashba he's talking about.
Yeah, it's the Rashba. Yes.
Okay. אבל איסור מרובה לתוך היתר מועט ואפילו מחצה על מחצה אין אומרים נותן טעם לפגם מותר עד שיפגם לגמרי. But if it's a lot of isur with just a little bit of heter, or if it's even just 50-50, we don't say it's the case of noten tam nifgan until whatever the pagum is, it's completely spoiled.
She'eino ru'ui l'ma'achal adam.
So it has to
Exactly.
be something that people don't eat.
So, okay, fine. And then, yeah, go on.
ואם אין שם משהו של איסור, אלא תעמוד בלבד, אפילו איסור מרובה והתר מועט, מותר אם פוגעים קצת. So if there's actually nothing, there's no actual physical substance left except for the chemical remnants of the taste.
Well, don't go that extreme. It might be like even melted fat is not called mamasho necessarily, or let's say, or if it's pureed and in such a way that it's mixed that you can't see it anymore, that might also be called tamo. We'll
Do you think it's Siro shell Isur is like the gufo here, right? So I don't know if it's melted. Do you think that works? Because I think he's talking about the case of I know this, right? That like chicken.
he's talking
I don't know
about he's
something.
talking about flavor in a pot. He's talking about flavor in
Yeah,
the pot. That's what the
he's
Rashba
talking about
talks about.
yeah, he's talking about you're removing like a mama show that fell in, and you assume that all its flavor went out, but not that that there's like juices that you see or anything like that. I don't think, right?
No, if a piece of meat falls into your pot and you take it out, we say that the mamasho is not there and there's just juices there. And the juices
Exactly.
are not
Yeah.
mamasho. Maybe my
Yes,
fat
but not.
example is a bit extreme. Maybe that
That's
was
the
a bit
reason. Yeah.
extreme.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
juices are also considered not mamasho. Okay, that's all I wanted to say. Fine, I accept the correction. Juices from the meat is also not considered mamasho. That's just considered tamo because you took out the big piece. So if it's that case, afilu iser merube veheter mu'at. But wait a second, that sounds a bit weird. If it's mostly juice, so he doesn't mean that. He means he's really thinking about the case of the pot. He's really thinking about the case of the pot where you had a pot, and we said that all the walls of the pot have absorbed iser, and we count against the whole volume of the walls of the pot, and that might be more than the volume, more than 50%. If you have a small amount of liquid in the pot and it's a lot of walls, then it could be that the majority is the tom coming out of the metal walls versus the water. So he said, the ad con, we don't go that far and say that even if there's more tom than the thing, we're not going to usher it. So maybe that is a better case, like you were saying, Josie, actually. Shetamo bilvad afilu isur merube v'heter muat mutter impogem ktsat. So in that case, you just need a little bit of pogem. Okay.
ויש מי
Yeah, go ahead. יש מי
יש
שכוחך, yeah.
לומר שאם הגדיל האיסור מידתו של התר עד שהוא משביח יותר כשאכלו בגדול בדתו ממה שהוא פוגם בהפסד טעמו אסור. So this is the Ron's case, is saying if there's so much asur, even if it's just even if it's all pogam, that you'd rather have a whole lot of yucky stuff then have a little piece of something delicious, then it becomes asur again.
Ad she.
Until it gets to be inedible entirely.
And then it would be mutter again. But made of Armor.
במה דברים אמורים? שפוגעים מתחילתו ועד סופו. So this isn't the case when it's pogam the whole time. Aval im hishbiach l'sof pogam. If you have a little bit in and it's beneficial, but if you keep it in there, or there's too much, I'm not sure which case that is. It becomes spoiled. Oh, pogam l'sof hishbiach asur. So any of these cases where it sort of goes from good to bad, or the kima, the item that's bad, goes from improving to detrimental, or detrimental to improving, it's asur.
Right. So let's look at the shach bet, and he says like this. He says, "Afilu pogem ktsat, aval davar she'eino noten tam lo l'shevach v'lo l'fgam." What if it's like it doesn't give flavor, positive or negative? Asur. Then it's asur. It has to be mamash pagum. It can't. Even though we said it's ktsat, it has to actually be ktsat. It can't be neutral. The Ketav Beit Yosef al Shem Hagaot Ashiri, Perak Patra Davodah Zara, U B'Torah Tatat Klal Pehe, Din Kafbet, B'Shem Amari, Al Shem Or Zarua, V'Nira Li Raya Mimai De Kaimalan De Ein Begidim B'Noten Tam. So the proof is that the Gidim have no flavor. V'Afilu Achi Kaimalan De Gufo Shel Gid Shenimoach Tzarich Shishim Kenegdo. Even though the gid doesn't give flavor, yet if it's melted into the food, the gufo shall gid nimoach, tzarich shishim negdo. Kedalei Siman. So what does that prove? So you see that even without flavor, the substance is asur and requires a total bittul. And we don't call it pagum. If we would call it pagum, if we would say that the gid is pagum, then we wouldn't need shishim. But you see that it's not pagum, and we need shishim. So therefore, even though it's neutral, you need 60. Kedalei Siman Samachei Sif Tet, the Siman Kuf Sif Bet, even though this gid is not really anything but like a piece of wood. HaTorah asarto, kedamrina be'per gid anashe. The Torah specifically forbid it, even though the gid has no flavor. V'hu adin l'kol davar iser. And so too for any other thing that's asur, if it gives no flavor, da'afal gav de'ino noten ta'am, even though it doesn't give flavor, it's tzarich shishim negdo. Kind of like min b'mino. In min b'mino, it doesn't give flavor because it's all the same flavor, and we need 60 there, or we need rove, or we need something. We don't say it's batel. V'hachi ite b'Yerushalmi v'perek yud b'trumat halacha dalid v'hadamarta lo l'shevach v'lo l'fkam asur. So he says, so he brings this proof from Gid Anashe that if it's neutral, it's not considered pagum. Now look at the siftei dat on this, which is bet. And I'll read it. I'll read it to you guys. You guys with me? Siftei dat bet. So this is the right prima gut. He says like this: Ayin shach v'hine haminchas kohen b'chelik aleph pei yud perik yud. I don't know. Hesig alav, who didn't agree. V'pri chadash ot bet chara po bo ubashach, and the pri chadash got angry at both of them. V'katav, and this is what the pri chadash says. V'katav the ishtabush kahane. You know what that means? The ishtabush kahane. It means the kohanim have made a mistake because the shach is a kohen, and so is The other one that he quoted here.
Minchas Cohen. Minchas Cohen is the other one.
Minchas Cohen. So he says, Ishtabech Kahana. I always like this when they use this colorful language. So he says, they both, the Kohanim, by the way, where's that a reference to? Ishtabech Kahane? The reference to the Talmud on Yom Kippur? Right? We don't want, we don't, it's the Mishnah, I think, in Yoma. We don't give them yayin or something, or we don't let that, we don't want them to make a mistake in the Ishtabech. I think that they shouldn't, the Kohanim, when they go into the Kohen, when he goes into the temple, shouldn't make a mistake. I think, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's a reference to that. No, Joel, you're trying to remember. I think there's a no.
There is one about passing all the animals in front of him, right? In order that he remembers he doesn't make a mistake, but I can't remember if that's uses the same language or not.
All right, the Ishtubash Kahane. Anyway, maybe not the exact language. Anyway, the Kavana lo l'shevach v'lo l'fgam. Wait, hold on. The Kavana lo l'shevach v'lo l'fgam hainu shitamo nirgash. In other words, when the Shach said if it's not the shevach and not the l'fgam, it's usher. And he says with that, when it's usher is only when the tam is nirgash. Asur. That's what's asur. But if the flavor would be undetected, that's a different story. It's where the flavor is detected and it's not l'shevach or not l'fkam. Ubeikar adin heskima min kohen beiser sheyavesh ke'etz. If it's yavish ke'etz te'ena ra'udi leger min Torah mutter. If it's really like a piece of wood, then obviously it's mutter. So the Shach was saying if it's yavish ke'etz, it's bi'aser. Ba'al yedei tarovet lo gazru. In other words, even if there's a gezerah on it, the rabbanan, you can't eat it, but they didn't gazru when it's in a mixture. So that answers our question about the bird that's maybe ma'us. Maybe it's also gazru. Anyway, velo dami legira nashe. And it's not like the Gita Nashidat Torah Asarto. Vashach gufa b'siman kuf yudalit kekatav the yavish ke'etz ein as oser. Raminchas Yaakov Klal Pei Hey Ot Ayin Heskim the Pri Chadash. I'm just skipping a little bit. Va'ani. All right, I'm skipping. So Ad Kan Lashon. See that? Va'ani. There's a period there. Va'ani ha'ani. I, the poor man, tamha al atzmi, I surprised with myself. Lama he'eshimu, I wondered to myself, really. Lama he'eshimu l'shach zal, halo devarav kenim kemo shagid. He's actually right. Devadai gid hanashe eitz hu. It is an eitz. It's like an eitz. V'torah chiyav aval basar nevela sheyavish ke'etz, but that's different from like meat that got dried up like wood. Nehi im achalto kach yavish. If you ate it like that, efshar de mutter min Torah. Maybe it is mutter. Mikol makom kishechozer v'nimoach b'tavshil. But if it got all dissolved in the tavshil, harei ne'eneh mimenu. Now you're all of a sudden going to benefit from it. The Isser Torah Ispe. The Efshar Ba'odo Yavesh Nami. And maybe even when it was still dry. So he's saying like this. He's saying that when it was dry, maybe it's mutter. But if it got moistened in the cooking process, then the Shach is right. Even though it didn't give any flavor, neither pagam nor neither good nor bad flavor. It well now it's giving good flavor, so it's us. So he says, so I think he's trying to say that you should learn from Gita Nashe that even if it gives no flavor, it's going to be us. So I think in the end we're sticking with the Shach. Yeah. Okay. Let's look at Shach. Here, Max, you want to read Shach? Hey.
Sure. Zel Lashon Harashba.
Wait, so where are we? Get us up
We're
up
in
to speed here.
we're in
Ve'im
oh,
ein
the
sham
im mamasho,
mamasho
yeah.
shel iser
Elatamo.
elatamo bilvad. Then, if it's just tam, then don't even need rove. So okay,
Right.
so
That's the end of the Rashba.
right.
Right. Zelosh on a Rashba and v'niresh afilu nafal l'soch heter muad v'hikiro zorko v'harotev mutar l'fi she'in kan elatamo v'lo mamasho.
So that's what I was saying. That's called ein tam over the show. As long as you took the piece of meat out, even though the juices are still there. V'afagav.
V'afal gav de misha'arin bekulo mishum mai dinafik mine lo yadinan mishum mai dinafik lo yadinan hashta de ein bo b'ha'naso b'nosin tam ein oser ta'arovto klal. Right.
Right. In other words, even though we have to measure against the whole piece, let's say the piece was a liter and you took it out, so now you have to have, let's say, a liter against you. If it would be tam l'shavach, you would need you need 60 liters against it. So you measure against the whole thing. So you might say, if you have majority, if it was larger, let's say it was 1 liter versus 1 liter, so then then it would be usser really. But if you took it out, it's now just tam. So even though you don't have majority heter, we'll still say it's mutter because it's just tam. Even though we do normally measure against the whole thing, but since we took it out, the measuring against the whole thing is only a chumrah really. You understand the case? In other words, let's say a whole liter of isser falls into a whole liter of heter, but the isser is pagum. Now I take out that liter. Now, according to the Rashba, I don't have majority, so it should be us, even though it's pagum, even though it's pogem. But it's only a chumrah really that we say you measure against the whole thing, because it's just that we don't know how much came out. So we're not going to say it's not majority. But what if it would be 2 liters versus 1 liter? What if it would be 2 liters of isser that fell into 1 liter of heter? Then apparently also it would be mutter. As long as you
it's
took it out.
only tam.
As long as it's only tam, even though the juices might be a lot. Okay, that's why I was saying that thing about the fat, because then how far do you go? Maybe if the juices, what if the juices themselves are a majority? Anyway, he doesn't get into that detail.
Nachum, I have a very small question. You use the word for time, you use the word juices. Did they have that in mind, juices? Or they had in mind something more ephemeral than juices?
Well, I'm just trying to describe how I would describe a piece of, they're describing a piece of meat falling in and then you pull it out. And what remains in the pot after you pull it out? I would say there's also some juices there. But you're right, they only call it tam. But I'm saying my understanding is that the word tam in their minds includes things that we would call juices.
Anyway, I'm a
Oh.
supak on that. I mean, I've been thinking about that a lot. I'm just saying, I'm a supak on that.
I hear you.
Because the juice is already a mamoshes of a kind. So
I know.
I'm
thinking that they're like in the medieval times and there's alchemy and they don't really know what things are made out of. I remember we saw that like the substance of the food gets smaller when you cook it and it goes into the walls.
Right.
They have a kind of fuzzy science in their minds. So I'm not sure what mama shoot means. Yeah, Joe.
Okay.
Yeah, I know. I was curious about this because the Taz, right, in Gimel, he says that Seer, right, he gets it from the Torah, that Seer shall isur chashuv kegufo, right? So it sounds like not the juices then, but or at least what he says later, he says, right, actually he says even better maybe. He says, that Seer shall isur chashuv
Let's
kegufo.
look at that. But give me a minute to look at that Gimel. Where it's later?
No, it's here. It's here. It's a Taz Gimel. Yeah.
Taz Gimel. Kagon shenafal iser gadol l'rotev mu'at v'zarko. You took out the iser. V'zarko ha'isr min ha'rotev u'mivuar b'tur ditzir shel iser chashuv kegufo mishum ומשום הכי, אם נתערב ציר בעין של איסר להתר, צריך שיהיה פוגם. If you actually poured gravy into it, then of course it's then it's mamasho. Oh, shiye rov heter. Okay, no, but he's actually proving my point because he's
Well,
saying
maybe.
when you pour, he says, don't get the wrong idea. Just because if I take out the isser and you say, some juices remain, then maybe I could have a whole lot of juices. He says, but if you actually would pour juices in, then I consider it mamasho. But anything that comes out of the piece is negligible.
Yeah, I think the word that's doing all the work there is be'ain or be'ain, right? Is that
exactly.
if you see it, like the actual juices come out and then they come in, like you see them sweating off the thing and they drop in, that would be different. But or you pour them in, as you said. But if it's in the thing, you never see the stuff that the juice come out of it, then that's okay. That's just Tom. So maybe the difference between Tom and juices is, did you see it or not, right? Did you actually, is it be'ain?
Right. It has to be sir ba'ain shel isser. If it's sir ba'ain, but if you just took it out and as you imagine that there's some juices there, because there probably are, that's bata. But if you see,
it's kind of like
but again, how would you see it? I said you have to pour it. It has to be separate because how would you see it?
Exactly. Yeah, if you pour it in or something like that. So, but that tells you that like Tom can be juices, but it has to be juices that you never see, as opposed
So I
to
was
juices that you do see.
You guys are really nailing me to the proverbial cross. Yes, the example of the Schumann was an extreme example, and the Taz seems to be against that. Yeah, but I was just trying to emphasize the point that there
Let's
could
just
be
call it the juice of the juice.
The juice of the Jews. Is that what you said?
I didn't say juice. I said juice. I said juice.
Yes. Okay. Good. So wait, let's go back. I'm sorry. We got to go back to the Shach now. What did the Shach say? I lost track of the Shach.
I think we're at Ukmoshe Amarnu.
But can you summarize what we said up to now?
He just said that if it's only Tom and not Mamish, then you don't have to measure against the whole Isser. It's just a question of Tom.
Right. Then even if it's majority Tom, it's mutter. Right. That's in fact what is actually written in the Shulchan Aruch. All right. So go on.
Right. וכמו שאמרנו, בהתר שנסבשל בקדרה שאינה בס יומא, והטעם בכל אלו מפני שוודאי ידענו שאין פליטתו בכולו, אלא כל שטעמו לשבח, אנו מחמירים בו, שאנו חוששים שמא פלטה עד שייתן טעם בטהרתו.
Exactly. So there is by a regular pot, in a regular case, we assume that the whole wall is full of bad flavor, of Isser flavor. So we're machmir there. But we're not going to be machmir if it's pagum, if it's pogem. If that time is pogem, then we're going to be lenient. All right, continue.
לפיכך, כל שתואמו כפלה ואין בו טעם,
That's his proof.
Right.
That's his proof because he said if you would have a goy taste it would be mutter. Because we don't say that for sure there's that flavor.
Right.
והילכך,
כשהעשר פגום אין משערים בכולו, אלא בטעמו, וטעמו כמי שאינו שהרי פגום הוא. עד כאן. Right, and that's just a summary, which is if it's just Tom, then the Tom is pagum and it's mutter.
Right, exactly.
Can you spell kol shetamok fela? What does that mean?
That means that if we ask the Gentile to taste it and tell us, do you taste the Isser here? And he says, no. Yes, I taste the Isser, then it's Usser. But if he says no, then it's mutter.
Oh.
And the fact that we rely on that, even though we might have said, well, wait a second, there's 60 in the walls against there's too much in the walls. He's got to taste it. There's got to be Usser. So you see that we weren't really sure when we assumed that that the walls were fully absorbed with flavor and fully adding flavor to our heter food. That was only a suffix, and therefore we could mivarer the suffix by asking the Gentile, and he tells us no, and we rely on him.
So that overrides, even though it's more than shishim, it overrides it.
Yeah, that's what he's saying. It's actually interesting. I wonder if Rev Landis will tell us that this is a great moment where is he saying it theoretically we could ask him, or is he saying it actually that's the halacha? Right, you're muted. You're muted, Rabbi Landis. You're muted.
Linus, you're muted. Ralph Linus, I don't know if you can hear us.
We didn't hear
You're,
you.
you're muted, Ralph Linus.
That's why you were smiling at my yelling. 60 is a construct. It's like a chazaka. Reality breaks through when you have a taste that tells you an Easter is there. At that point, there's no contest.
No, but what about the other way around? And the other way around too, when he tells the issue is not there.
Okay. The default position is 60. If I'm saying it right, which is what default means. But nonetheless, the primary thing is reality. So I think.
But Ralph Linus, you used this once, right?
I use it all the time.
You did, okay.
I mean, I think that's part of the struggle. You build a system in which reality is hard to find or define, and therefore you build a system in which you have a sort of chazaka. 60 is an unbelievable number. It's like, almost feels like an infinite number. But what can you do? The taste comes through, the taste comes through. But I guess what I was trying to say is that 60 is a careful number. Of course, with 60. And you have that in the Gemara itself, where they say, well, what about 30? Right? One of the younger Talmidim, in front of his father, uses 30 as and the father says, you can't do that. Can't do it. 60 is there for a reason. But it's not saying, he didn't say it's there for a reason because it's correct. He says it's there for a reason because that's the structure of how we protect ourselves.
All right, let me add one more thing before we take a break, which is Shach Zayin. He says in the Shulchan Aruch, he says, Aval im heshbiach sof pogem. If at the beginning it was a good flavor, and only at the end it was pogem. Oh, pogem, or it started off pogem. Sof heshbiach asur. In either case, it's going to be asur. So now the Shach adds an interesting point. He says, Perush. He says, O pogem ubesof hishbiach. So it started off pogem, and then it became good. Then it's asur. He says, Perish, when is it asur? It's only asur after it made the flavor good. Aval kodem sheshbiach, when it was still in a state of pogem, mutter. In other words, don't think that if I know it's going to be pogem in 5 minutes, but now I know it's going to be I know it's going to be mishabeach or mashbiach in 5 minutes. But now what is it? Now it's pogem, so it's mutter to eat. אף על פי שאפשר שישביח אחר כך, כיוון דהשת פוגם הוא, מידי דהווה חסרת מלח לכמה. In other words, at this moment, don't tell me I could add salt, I could remove salt. At this moment, it's pogem, so you can eat it. So he says, when it says asur here in the Shulchan Aruch, he doesn't mean it's asur, it means only it's asur when it's mashbiach. Max.
This is basically Reish Lakish, right? These are the two.
Yeah.
Of Reish
Well,
Lakish.
Oh,
we didn't read it yet, but the Ramah is about to bring up the Reish Lakish. Now, just a second. If you look in the Siftei Dat Zayin, he says Ayin Shach. He says Ayin Pri Chadash Otchet Cholek Alze. He doesn't agree. He says no. If it's going, he doesn't agree. He says if it's going to be mashpiach at any point, then you can't eat it. Knesset Gedolah Ubahagaot Beit Yosef Otchet Hechmir Gamkein. Another opinion was Machmir. V'yir l'tzaded l'hakel. But I say we can be lenient. Devadai Isser Torah Leka, because for sure there's no Torah Isser. V'ken hashbiach u'besof pogem, and so to the other way around. What if it's hashbiach u'besof pogem? It started off really good, and then at the end, well, that could be worse because it already was mashbiach, and the fact that you kept cooking it and it got usher, it still was usher. It was still shem isser alav. It was called usher. It was called usher, so maybe it should remain usher. He says, "Yir li delecha isser Torah ela mishum dechal shem isser alav. Dechal shem isser ela dechal shem isser lo shayich latiro." He says, really, it's not an isser Torah, but since became usher, the rabbis are not going to permit you to eat such a thing. In other words, at the moment that the two met together, it was mashbiach. So the fact that you cooked it a little longer and now it ruined it, but it was but it's just like you cooked an isser and then it became less good. But it was an isser before. It's going to remain isser, even if it's not isser Torah. Okay, so that's just a qualification there of the Shulchan Aruch. All right, let's take a break and we'll come back in at 8, at 10, in 5 minutes. Eitan, can you read the Ramah?
Sure. Yesh omrim, af al gav de ha'isur lifgam v'machal mutar, mikol makom hakdera asura. Ve'im bashluba achar kach toch me'etz la'etz, tavshil sha'isur harishon noten botam la'shevach, ne'asar ha'tavshil ha'sheni, im lo hayabo shishim neged ha'isur harishon. Aval im ni'aru hatavshil harishon bakaf v'tachbo achar kach hakaf latavshil sheni shehu gam kein pogem lo ne'esra hakdera. V'kem b'davar she'ein lo tam klal, kegon hayoreh shematichin bo hadvash, af al pi sheyesh sham raglei hadvorim lo ne'esra hayoreh, v'chol kayotze bazeh. So even though the isur that mixes in is lifgam, and the food is therefore mitar, in any case, the kedera is asur. If you were to cook something in it afterwards within 24 hours, the food that went in to the first thing that you cooked in it, that is asur, would give good flavor to the second thing that you cook in it, making it prohibitive.
In other words, what's the case? Let's think of a case. For example, you were cooking chocolate. I don't know. You fell in an isser of meat, and it ruined your chocolate. So now you take out the meat, and now the chocolate is mutter. So you take out the chocolate, you eat the chocolate. Now you clean the pot, and you boil up some chicken soup. Now the meat flavor that's in the walls of the pot actually is good for the chicken soup, let's say. So it's going to usher the chicken soup because it has meat flavor in the walls. And the meat flavor was only a problem for the chocolate, but not for this chicken soup. Okay, and then he goes on another din. That makes sense. We can understand that.
Right.
Unless you have 60 against unless the chicken soup is 60 against the original meat that fell in the chocolate. Right. Aval, im naro. Now brings another case with the spoon. What is the spoon case?
Right, but if you were to stir this first tafshil, let's say the meat and the chocolate in your example, with a spoon, and then afterwards you were to put this same spoon into the second, let's say chicken soup in your case, the second dish you're making, and that spoon therefore also would make the chicken soup taste bad, then the kedera has not been asur. Meaning that second pot is not asur because of that, because the spoon is no tein tam leaf gam, it seems like.
Wait a second. What's it's 2 pots. I think you agree. I think we agreed in the end it's 2 pots, right? It's a pot of chicken soup and a pot of chocolate. And I stir the chocolate with the spoon.
Well, no, now it's 2 pots of things that it's pogemin, right?
Right. Okay.
So it can't be chocolate. It can't be chocolate and chicken soup anymore.
Okay.
Oh,
Wait,
meaning
that's
right,
aval.
right.
Let me just read it again. Aval im na'aro tavshil harishon bekaf. So you have the chicken and the meat there, and you stirred it. V'tachvo achar kach hakaf l'tavshil sheni. And now you took this spoon and you stirred something else. Shugam kain pogem, and the meat you stirred it like a let's say caramel sauce for your ice cream with the same spoon now. And now the meat that was in the spoon from the first pot got into the caramel, but it didn't forbid the caramel because it's also pogam the caramel. But now, what about the pot of the caramel? What if I afterward in the caramel pot I cook chicken soup? So that was already mutter. Lo nesra hakadera, the second pot, in such a case. The second pot of the caramel is not going to, so we don't go that far because the actual meat was never there. The actual meat was only in the first pot. Just the flavor from the spoon was there. V'ken b'davar she'ein lo tam klal, kagon hayoreh. So what about something that has no flavor, like bees' legs? Bees' legs have no flavor. So when you boil up honey, you heat up the honey so that you can pour it through a filter so that you can get out all the bees' legs. Because otherwise it's too thick. So you heat it up. But now while you're heating up the honey, the bees' legs flavor went into the honey. Now the honey is mutter. Why is the honey mutter? Because nobody wants bees' legs flavor in their honey. That's what he talks about. V'ken b'davar she'ein lo tam, like these bees' legs, klal, kagon hayor shemitichin bo hadvash, af al pi sheyesh sham raglei advarim, lo nesra hayor. Now, even though we have only one pot, the yorah doesn't become usher. You say, wait a second, if I cook something else in the pot now, maybe those bees' legs give good flavor to it. He says, but the bees' legs didn't give any flavor, actually. It's not that they're bad flavor. They don't have any time at all. So therefore, it's mutter also. Okay, let's go on. Gimel. Keep reading, Eta.
אפילו אין כוח באיסור לבדו לפגום, אלא על ידי דבר אחר שמסייעו, כגון שנפל איסור לקדרה שיש בה מלח או תבלין מדוכין, ואלמלא המלח והתבלין שבה לא היה כוח באיסור לפגום אפילו הכי מותר.
Who's this? What is this in the Gemara? Whose opinion in the Gemara is this?
This is Reish Lakish?
This is Reish Lakish, the lenient Lishna.
Right.
The lenient Lishna. Okay, go on. Dal.
Shemenu dvash shel ove kochavim af al pi shehem mevushalim mutarim mipnei shabasar pogem et hashemen umasricho v'chein ladvash.
So what's the problem here? The problem is that the shemen and the dvash are heated up by the goyim, and their pots they might have used for meat, and the meat that they used was treif meat. So now we have treif meat in our honey, and same thing. The treif meat in the honey is ruining the meat, is ruining the honey. So therefore, it's pogem the honey. Therefore, it's not usr. Now, there's a long discussion here, which we're not going to get into, unfortunately, but about like, is really honey and meat a good thing or a bad thing? And in the end, maybe they say it's bad if it's made vash. But let's just take it. In the end, we basically come up with this halacha, as everybody agrees to. In the end, that shemen that it's bad. We don't want the shemen flavored. We don't want the dvash to be flavored with meat. Okay, read the Hagah.
ויש אומרים שדבשר אינו פוגם דבש עצמו, רק משקה הנעשה מדבש.
So that's what I was saying. There's those that say no, dvash is actually good with meat. It's only the like honey water that it ruins, that meat ruins. Now, because people say, I make meat and I put honey on it. Of course, the proportions are going to be different here. You don't want honey with meat flavor. You might want meat with honey flavor. Anyway, yesh omrim de basar eno pogem devash atzmo. Fine. Ubamakom she'ein have said gadol yesh lachmir. So he's saying if it's not a hefset gadol, I guess that would mean then, well, what about the honey that you buy from the goy? I mean, there's a whole nother reason to matir it, which is that the pot itself is been we assume that he hasn't cooked meat in it recently, and that's about we're about to see. But based on the idea of honey and vash being pogem, maybe that's not a heter, but we could maybe find a heter in a different way. Here, now we just read a little bit more. Basar o halav b'yayin, or I'll read. Basar o halav b'yayin have lifkav mutter. Right, basar o. I can't imagine meat getting into my wine, but okay, I guess if I boil the wine, is pagum. Okay. Hey. Here. So Noah, maybe you'll read hey.
Sure. Sorry. Halacha hey, right?
Mm-hmm.
Page hey. Okay. Kol keder she'ena bat yoma chashiva tama lifgom ve'ina oseret.
So that's a famous halacha, right? Everybody knows that halacha.
Yeah.
That kol kadeir she'ena bat yoma. What does she'ena bat yoma mean?
It could either be 24 hours or it could be overnight.
Right, but well, ain't bat yoma means it's right. It's been more than 24 hours, or it's been
Yeah.
more than overnight.
That's what I mean.
Right.
Yeah.
Chashiva tam lifgam ve'eno oseret. Okay, v'nikret. Or now he's going to go on. V'nikret.
ונקראת בת יומא כל זמן שלא שהתה מעת לעת אחר שנתבשל בה האיסור. וכיוון שעבר עליה מעת לעת אחר שנתבשל בה האיסור, אינה נקראת בת יומא.
And therefore it's mutter. So as long as 24 hours have passed since the time you cooked the isser, it's going to be giving a bad flavor, and anything cooked in you can't use the pot, but if by accident you use the pot, then anything cooked in it will be mutter. Ve'im bishel, and that's what he says. Ve'im bishel. Notice he doesn't say it's mutter to bishel. He says ve'im bishel. If by accident you cooked, so read on.
אם בישל בה כשאינה בת יומא תבשיל מותר דה ואינו טעם לפגם.
Exactly. Go on.
והוא שתהיה מודחת שלא יהיה שומן על פניה, שאם לא הדיחה אוסר, והרי היא כחתיכת האיסור שלא נפגמה. And that
In other words, exactly. It has to be clean. It has to be clean. In other words, it could be dirty while you were waiting the 24 hours, but before you cooked it, it had to be clean. It's not that it has to be standing necessarily clean for 24 hours. It's that it has to have two conditions that are each independent of each other. One is it has to be 24 hours, and the other is that it has to be clean when you actually do cook. Because if it's not clean, the shuman there is like a chaticha. It's not pagum. The shuman on the film on the lining of the pot does not necessarily get ruined after 24 hours. If you look at Shach Tet Vav, he says, La'el Rosh Siman Sadi Hey. We didn't learn that yet. Katavti Distam Kelim Shenitbashil Behen Amrinan Shayu Nakim. Oh, so we say that if we don't know whether there's a film or not, then we say it's clean. We assume it's clean. Velohaya Shuman Davuk Behen. We hold that there is no fat on it. And if that's true, which it is, the fizeh mashakatav v'hu shetiyeh mudachat that the mechaber wrote that it has to be clean. Haynu la'afuke kishiyadua beberur shelo hayta nekiya. It's only if you know for sure that it was dirty, but if you don't know at all, you can assume it was clean. Ve'ena shai shelo hayta nekiya ve'ena mudachat. It has to be that you know for sure that it was which again you have to know for sure that it was not clean and not cleaned. The kamash malan the hashuman hadavuk And it comes to teach us that the Shuman Hadavuk Eino Noten Tam Nifgam Achar Meit Late. The 24 hours is not enough time to pogem the film. Vahayesh Matirin. So wait a second. Do we see the Yesh Matirin? So let's read on in the Shulchan Aruch. Here you read Noam.
Yeah. V'yesh matirin afilu bishel ba kodem shehedicha. So there's a position that even if you haven't rinsed or wiped it, it's mutar.
And you know that there's dirt there.
Yeah.
And you know that there's dirt there. So why did they matir it? So if we go back to the Shach, he says, Vayesh matirin svirilu shetichat isur sha'al pnei akli nifkam, that the film on it is nifkam gamkin achar me'et leit. They hold that no, 24 hours is enough to ruin the nifkam. In other words, not only does the 24 hours matir the absorbed flavor in the walls of the pot, it also, they hold, ruins the flavor of the film. By the way, this goes against some rabbis that I've heard say that the whole concept of flavor in the pot is just really referring to film. And that nowadays pots, or pots that don't have film, you see here clearly that there's two different concepts. There's the concept of the film, and there's the concept of what's absorbed in the pot. And they're two different things. And you can't tell me that, when they were talking about absorbed in the pot, they meant film, really. No, film is something else. V'data tur siman kuf kaf bet, kisfara rishona, which means, what's the svara rishona? Not the mekeli. V'ken nira dat abet Yosef, v'ken lekaman siman kuf kaf bet, where Kuf Kaf Bet is the simon where he talks about Kelim and Hagala and Noten Tam Lifgam in more depth. Lo hevi elos rishona. He didn't bring the second opinion. V'ken pasach b'torat chatatz klal pei did v'ken pasach hamarshal. So basically, Shach is telling us this Yesh Omrim, we don't hold like it. Nobody, if you're gonna have them, he quotes the Marshal, he quotes the Shulchan Aruch himself, and he quotes the Torah Tatat. So we don't really paskin like this idea, but you should know that there's this idea that actually the film is also about that. You're right. Okay, so go on. The im yesh shishim.
Sorry, in the Ramah. Ve'im yesh shishim neged ma shedavuk alav l'chulei alma sharei achar dagdera in abat yoma.
Oh, yeah, fair. Okay. So obviously, if there's 60 against it, then if there's 60 against the film, then the film is not a problem either way. All right, Vav, read on Noam.
So that means even despite the Shach's caveat that we go with the more machmir position, we nonetheless have the kula of the Ramah.
Yeah, if you can estimate or maybe know for sure that the film is very small compared to is a 60th of the volume, then go for it.
Okay, great.
Okay, go on to Vav.
יש מי שאומר שאם שמו פלפלים בגדרה של איסור שאינה בת יומא, הכל אסור, דחורפי משוויה לשבח.
So this is a very important halacha. This is a very important halacha because this is saying that what we said up till now, that pagum, after 24 hours, it becomes pagum. But if you cook something very harif, then it's mishavye l'shevach. It reinvigorates the bad flavor and makes it good again. It's the idea is that by spicing up you can sort of spice up the flavor that's pagum in the wall, and it becomes good flavor now all of a sudden. Joel?
I think it's worth throwing in the caveats of the Shach, and I mean the Bach does a nice job on this too, but the Shach and the Taz here, because I get questions about this all the time because people freak out about like.
So I want to look at the Taz Tet.
Yeah.
Joel, you want to read Taz Tet?
Sure, right. The chorfe, its sharpness, mashavya l'shavach, that it makes it into something, or l'shvach, to something nice. Muvu arba siman sadi hey, so that's in basar b'chalav, sif bet.
The davka rubo davar harif, right? Ba'inan. That we actually need it to be. It's not like I had, let's say, a pepper. I had some peppers in my soup, and therefore that's davar harif, and then all the flavor
Right.
that's.
It has to be a pot of Tabasco sauce.
Mm, but
Right. And as you're boiling up spicy Tabasco sauce, or you're making you know, matbucha. You're making some kind of Israeli spicy salad.
exactly. So. משום הכי באינן על כל פנים בתבלין חלק גדול שהוא נרגש הרבה בקדרה. Right? So it
It
needs to
doesn't
be
have to be
like
majority. It's enough
just
that
a lot.
it's a lot. If you have tomatoes in there too, but the spiciness of the hot peppers is making it very spicy, then that's also enough.
Yeah, as
Go
Joseph was
ahead.
right. If you fry spicy stuff first in the pot, that could be a problem in terms of taking time.
Right, right. Because sometimes if you fried the spicy and then added other things, so then you lost your heter.
Yeah, it might depend how much oil you use and so forth, but yeah, probably. So, um, but the other thing I just want to add, just it's like a small thing, if it's okay, Rav Nachum, if I can, because people ask me about this all the time, right? The shach says, right, and you're saying bibishul, right? It's not like you just put an onion, or let's put onions aside.
Ah,
You put a hot pepper cold in a pot, and the pot all of a sudden loses its pagum flavor in the
right.
walls. Yeah.
Well, we'll talk about that with knives. It's a little bit different. If you cut knives, then
Yes.
the knives is kind of like it's hot, but here we're talking about hot stuff for sure. I just
Exactly.
want to add one. I also want to add one thing here, which is that we do paskin like this. So we paskin, but the pot remains pagum for the next bishul. In other words, it's only in this bishul that we have this problem. But let's say I cooked hot Tabasco sauce, and now 5 minutes later, so now my Tabasco sauce is usser because I forgot that this pot was a treifa pot. But then I emptied out the Tabasco sauce and I boiled up rice in the pot. So do we say you have to wait 24 hours again? No, because the Tabasco sauce waking it up. By the way, when does it waken it up? What if the pot is a week old? Does it also waken it up? Presumably, yes. It's a week old pot, but you cook Tabasco sauce, it's as though it's fresh. So it's going to be ulcer. But now if I cook rice in the pot 5 minutes after I took out the Tabasco sauce, no problem, says the Marsha. Okay, now we're on Zion. The last halacha. Here, Isaac, why don't you read Zion?
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
So are you saying then that the entire, I think I asked something similar already, but the entire idea of Bat Yoma is predicated on Noten Tam Lifgam. There's no other element here that would eventually come in of like the Ta'am having passed as opposed to being Lifgam. You know what I'm saying? There's like the Ta'am has
There is an
degraded.
idea that we might see later. I think it's the Rosh who says that if you like boiled water in the pot,
Hagala.
and then or you boiled like even water with vegetables, and then you cooked, and then maybe those became usser, but then you cooked something else that might count like a kind of hagala.
It's similar to Hagala, right? So
Right.
sometimes
There is
this
a kind
this
of concept
heter is
like
not
that.
Hagala
Joel
is
wants
not predicated
Joel
on this, for example.
Joel has a better answer,
No,
I
no, no,
think.
not better. Just two things I remember. One, yeah, except for the Ramban is the one holdout where he's think well, water. He say yes, water. But where we have a difference between basar v'chalav and isur, where isur, if you
Ah,
use
yeah.
hot to boil something neutral within 24 hours, it reawakens the flavor. But for basar and chalav, like let's say I have a basari
Oh,
pot.
wait, that's our next simon. That's our next seep.
Oh yeah,
That's
we're
our
gonna
next
do
seep.
it. Okay,
So Isaac, go for it.
קדרה שהיא בלועה מבשר וחלב, שנתבשלו בה ביחד, או בזה אחר זה, וקודם שעבר לילה אחת, הוחמו בו מים, חשיבה בת יומא, עד שתשהה מעת לעת, משעה שהוחמו בך המים. Okay, so a pot that absorbed from basar b'chalav cooking together at the same time or one after the other. And before,
Ah, at the same time or one right after the other. Okay. Why? What's special about basar b'chalav?
Um, what do you mean? What's special about it? I mean, it's like two heteros
Well,
that are making research
what? All
together.
right, I have a question for you. How does remember the opinion of Rabbeinu Ephraim in the Tosfot, Rabbi Ephraim, or Rabbeinu Ephraim? He said, remember there's a din of Hanan b'Shari Surim and
Yeah,
Hanan b'Basar b'Chalav. So
I mean,
what's the
everyone
difference?
agrees that Basar B'chalav is Hanan, right? And then
Right.
our
And what does
question,
Rabbeinu Ephraim say about Shar Surim?
um, there's one person. I don't remember if he says that they're also Hanan or they're
He's
not.
the other way around.
He's
Rabbeinu
the not
Ephraim
Hanan.
says there's no Hanan in Shar Surim. And
Okay.
how does the Mechaber Paskin, like Rabbeinu
Um,
Ephraim or not?
like Rabbeinu Ephraim, I
Yeah. He
think, yeah.
Paskins like Rabbeinu Ephraim.
Yeah.
How does the tour Paskin?
Other way around.
No, also like
Nope.
Rabbeinu Ephraim.
Sorry.
Everybody Paskins like Rabbeinu Ephraim, which is that there's no Hanan in Shar Surim except the Ashkenazim, except the Raman. So he is very particular here in the Shulchan Aruch. He says, read it again from the beginning.
Um, okay. So pot that absorbed from basar b'chalav, that was basar and halav that was cooked together, or one after the other, and
Right.
before it's been left to sit overnight, you heat up water in it. Then it's considered a bat yoma pot until you wait another 24 hours from the point at which you warmed up the water.
Right. Exactly. Now this, we have so it's like the time you start counting the time again from the water. And he says specifically by Basar B'chalav. Why does he say specifically by Basar B'chalav? Because only there is there Hanan in, so he must be holding that it's the water is becoming Chatichat Nevela, and therefore the water now goes back into the walls of the pot, and it's like a new Nevela going into the pot, and so
Yeah.
therefore it's a new time. We have to count again.
Yeah.
Presumably, now this is very interesting because we didn't really discuss this, but we'll have to remember this when we get to Basar B'chalav. Because when we get to Basar B'chalav, we're going to say that the rationale of Rabbeinu Ephraim, the whole rationale of Rabbeinu Ephraim, is that this is Heter and this is Isser, and they come together. And at that moment, you get now a new creation. This is Heter and this is Heter. Milk is Heter and meat is Heter. They come together and they create an Isser. So now it's Nasei Nevela. It's like a new Nevela. But logically, then, the next time around, when you take that mixture of milk and meat, it should logically be considered just like any other nevela, and you should say no Hanan. But here the Mechaber is saying the opposite. He's saying, since originally it was milk and meat mixed together, now even the water becomes Hanan. And presumably, if you pour that water into some other water that was hot, it would make that water usher, and so forever. In other words, it's not just the initial interaction of milk and meat that creates Hanan. Even the subsequent interactions of the result of that first interaction creates Hanan, according to the Mechaber. And that sort of goes against the whole explanation that Rabbeinu Ephraim gave. Because Rabbeinu Ephraim said
it's a chain reaction.
Right, but it doesn't fit to Rabbeinu Ephraim.
It doesn't fit.
But that's the way the Mechaber understands it. All right, wait a second. So,
for him, it's like for Mechaber, it's like a chiddush after a chiddush. Each time it's a chiddush. That's what a chain reaction is.
Yeah,
each time it's a new deal.
Right.
Okay.
Now, according to the Ramah, all Kol Shekin, because the Ramah says the same thing even by Shar Isur. So that's what the Ramah is about to say. So Isaac, read the Ramah.
Of all
Oh, actually, he's not going to say that. He's going to say something else first. I think he's going to say what I said, but
we're going to go into Linat Laila because that's the weird thing about this one. Yeah. is that it says Kodem She'avar Laila, but then we go Me'et La'et, right? Like so. Anyway, well, we'll see what the Haggah says. אבל אם עברה לילה מותר, וכן אם עברה לילה בין בישול בשר לחלב, אף על גב דאחר כך הוחמו המים מיד, נמי דינה הכי, והוא הדין בכל
Here, no,
האיסורים.
before you get to who I didn't call it, sir. Before you get that, that's the second part. But the first part is this Linat Laila. Now, now, if you can remember this, does anyone remember who in the Gemara or the commentaries of the Gemara said that Linat Laila is considered Noten Tam Nifgam? Is considered Pogem? So Noam?
Rashi.
Rashi said that Laila is enough. So we don't paskin like Rashi. But here we do. Rashi is how do you say? He's Choser V'Nir. He comes back here, and we use him as a you say in Hebrew a sniff, as a factor to be lenient. So he says like this: if that's what the Mechaber said also. If a lila happened between, then the water is not going to do Hanan. He says, and the Ramah says, but if it would be a Laila, then it would be mutter, because there's no Hanan. V'kenim avra Laila, and then he adds, V'kenim avra Laila bein bishul basar l'chalav, bein bishul basar l'chalav. So what if there was a Laila between the cooking of the milk and meat? So then it's also like lifgam, and we don't create Hanan, and therefore there's no problem at all. In other words, the meat wasn't even because. It's interesting. What would you say about the meat? If you cooked milk in the pot, and then you didn't wait 24 hours, you waited a lila, and then you cook meat now, so the meat will be usser. But the meat will be usser because we need 24 hours, not just lila. But if you then cook something else in the pot that's like rice, that would be mutter. Because b'di'evid, like there was a kind of a lila between the milk and the meat, right? It's kind of it comes out like that, right? I think. V'ken im avra lila bein bishul basar v'chalav af agav da'achar kach uchmu hamayim. In other words, and then you cooked water after that. Nami dino hachi. It's also going to be mutter because we got a lila in there. As long as we slipped in a lila, we got rid of the problem of tam. All right, Vahu hadin, and now he says, but I am the Ramah. I hold that there's Hanan B'Shari Surim. So he says, Vahu hadin, B'Kol Surim. All right, read on from there.
לפי מאי, דקיימה לן בכל האיסורים, חתיכה נעשית נבלה. Why is this? Because he holds Hanan by all Isurim. ועיין לעיל blah blah blah, ובמקום הפסד, יש להתיר בחי גוונה, בשאר איסורים בכל עניין, רק שיהיה מעת לעת, מזמן בישול האיסור. Okay, but if you're in a situation where you're going to lose a lot of food, you can permit this with non-basar b'chalav isurin, so long as you have 24 hours between
the original Isser,
the original Isser, and then whatever
and the current heter being cooked. Yeah. So he's basically, this is very interesting because he's actually saying, he sort of, even though he's saying I hold Hanan B'Shari Surim, here is a place where he's not holding that din 100%. He's saying Hefsed Gadol, and in combination with Hefsed Gadol, and that the only reason that I'm ushering it is because you boiled water in the interim, and you sort of extended the life of the flavor in the pot. But had you not put water in there, then it would for sure be pagum. So I'm going to ignore the water. If it's a case of Hefsed Ru, I'm going to ignore the water by Shari Surim. By Basar B'Chalav, I agree with the Mechaber. By Basar B'Chalav, then I'm going to be strict. But by Shar Surim, I'm going to ignore the whole thing of the water boiling in the middle, giving longer life to the Isser. So you see from this that the clutch that the Ramah has on this din of Chanan B'Shar Surim is not very firm. He's willing to relinquish it in cases, but by Basar B'Chalav, he's not willing to relinquish it. Yeah, Ori.
I think I remember that we saw that earlier too, that the Hagaz language around Hanan Mashari Surim was at least it was like Yesh Machmirin, and that's what we do. I
He
don't know if
always
that's
he needs
exactly lashon,
another.
but he addressed
He
it.
always yes, it's true. It's not the first time. I'm just pointing it out again. It's not
Yeah.
the first time. We've had various cases where we see this. It's to me this is
Only
very
Shatat
interesting.
Chat, basically.
Yeah, here it's Hefset Meruba in combination with this sort of doubtful din of this water being boiled. It's kind of a doubtful din. And actually, in the time we have left, let's look at the tour about how doubtful this din is. It's kind of a strange din. So look in Kuf Gimel, Zion in Kuf Gimel. And everyone sees that? Here, Jacob, you want to read? You want to read the tour, Zion?
Okay. So the im betoch me le'es bas uba chamamuba afilu mayim levadam chasiva batuma az he me eight l'chlimum hamayim. And if it's
This is the
within
same
it,
din as we saw in the Shulchan Aruch.
yeah, exactly.
And he says Lefi.
Lefi shemisarin b'chol ktira ucham b'hamayim b'toch me'et la'et lo hayu b'mayim shishim levatla v'chazru hamayim kulan yisor. Since if we measured all the pot and warmed up in it water within 8 it there wouldn't be the water wouldn't be 60 times more the isser to or the pot to bottle it, and
then
all the water
mayim kulan is sur, and the mayim became a sur and ruins the pot. Now wait a second. I told you. First of all, did he say up till now? Has he said anything about basar b'chalav?
No.
So therefore, he's presumably talking about shar surim. But I told you quite authoritatively that the tour holds that in shar surim there is no chanan. So how could he say this din? Is this maybe this din doesn't have anything to do with chanan? So keep that in mind, and we'll see the Beit Yosef. But just read this. Just read one more sentence where he does talk about basar chalav, but in a totally different way.
Yeah. Ve'eno kain be'basar b'chalav could appreciate la'el be'hilchot basar b'chalav siman sadi dalad. In this,
what does he mean? Eno kain. Actually, we don't say this by basar.
Yeah.
The basar b'chalav. He's actually the opposite. So what does he really mean? What does he really mean? Eno kain. What's the case that's eno kain? Can you figure this out? Because actually, if you look over there, actually, you could go over into the tour and look at Sadi Dal, but we don't have time to look there. But can you figure it out?
I would think, well, is it the heating up water in between?
Perfect. Exactly. He's saying like this. If you cooked water in between the basar b'chalav, then we don't say, what don't we say? What would you have, what might you have wanted to say? the water became milk, and now the water, I boiled milk and then I boiled water. Now the water became milk, and now I count from, and if I cook meat within 24 hours of the water, it's like I cooked milk meat in a milky pot. We say that we don't say, and obviously we don't say that. Why? Well, why? Why don't we say that? I mean, you could say because there's no Hanan in Heter. We don't say Hanan in Heter. We say, but we do say Hanan in Shari Sur. But that's the wrong answer because the Tur can't be holding. In the first place, he wasn't holding that it's because of Hanan. This has nothing to do with Hanan. He didn't mention Hanan at all. So, but anyway, he's pointing out that for whatever reason, if you boil water in between meat and milk, then you don't start the clock from the water. You keep from the original meat. And if it's 24 hours from the original meat, and then you cook milk, the milk is going to be mutter. Okay, so let's look at the Beit Yosef. Yeah. Let's wait. Joel, you want to read the Beit Yosef?
Sure. ומה שכתב רבנו ואם בתוך מעיד לעת חממו בה מים וכולי. דין זה כתבו בעל התשומה ונתן טעם לדבר. I always like the pun when people do this in this case.
Yes.
דכך שווה המים לדידן כמו האיסור עצמו. Right? He thinks that the mayim becomes like the isur itself. Dechol hamayim nasu nevela. Right? Because now we've brought Hanan in the
well, I don't think so. But that's the way the Beit Yosef understands it. But I don't think so.
Good. Yeah, that's at least what he's understanding. So
he's first of all, right now he's quoting the Truma. This is all the quotation. Natan Tama Davar. What is his reason? Dekach shava hamayim l'didan kemo ha'isur atzmo. Dekol hamayim nasu nevela. Well, I think it just means I want to change that to be kol hamayim nasu isur.
Isur. Okay, that's fair. Kivan.
Because that's all he said in the tour. What did he said? He did give a reason.
He said v'chazru mayim kulan isur, right? Because
isur. He didn't say nevela. He said isur. So I think also here, even though he uses the word nevela, he means isur.
All right.
He's not saying hanan. He's just saying it's asur. V'kevan.
Kevan shelo haya bahem shishim levatel pleitata kli. Right, since they didn't.
In other words, everybody agrees that everybody, whether you say Hanan, you don't say Hanan Mishari Isur, everybody agrees the water is Usr. If you boil up, if you have a pot that's Isur and you boil up water that's not 60 times the Isur, then the water is Usr. Whether you say Hanan, you don't say Hanan.
What they're really saying is the water pulls out the Isur, and now the Isur has the clock restarted on it because you've cooked it essentially. So usmak hevi divrei בעל התשומה, וכתב אחר כך, יש הרבה מקלים בדין זה, אחר שאין בגוף האיסור בין יומו, אין להחשיבו כבין יומו עד כאן. So the Smak brings this, but he says lots of people are very lenient about this, but because the actual isur itself isn't ben yomo, it's the flavor that came out, right? And it's not the goof itself, and therefore a lot of people wouldn't consider this to be resetting the clock, shall we say, a ben yomo isur.
And that's all he says. We don't, right. And then let me just read a little bit here. V'li nira lahatir mipnei shekvar katavti b'siman sadi bet over in Basar B'chalav that we'll learn later. Shedat rov aposkim bale hora'ah, most of the poskim, maskemet ledat Rabbeinu Ephraim. They all agree to Rabbeinu Ephraim. So this is all the tour. This is all the Beit Yosef explaining now. He says, I personally say, since we go like Rabbeinu Ephraim, all this doesn't get started. Now, I want to skip. I can't read the whole thing because we don't have time. But let's look at the end of this as a bet, and that's the bet of the Darkei Moshe.
But Nachum, can I ask you just quickly? Are we looking for a substitute for Noten Tam with Gam? Excuse me. Is Noten Tam with Gam our substitute for Hanan?
Well, no, we're looking for a different explanation, a substitute explanation for why boiling water.
And then why
boiling water
gives us that?
It's not going to be noten time. Here, let's see.
Okay.
Let's look. Look at here. Wait a second, Joel. Wait a second. A second. Yeah, read bet. Read bet in the Darkei Moshe.
In Darkei Moshe. All right. V'ner Eli dehu adim din im leachar bishul hamayim avar lav halayla nami havedina ki'ilu avar kodem bishul. All right. So he says
Okay.
the rule.
So first of all, he says let's use Rashi here as a heter.
Yeah. So
second thing.
So as long as Lila passed. Ve'od nireh de'afagav dekatavti le'el siman tzadi bet danu nogim b'chol yishrim chanan. Right? Even though we, unlike the Beit Yosef and the Torah, hold that Hanan is everything. That we should rely. I think the makilin here are not the makilin like a Rabbeinu Ephraim, but the makilin that the smak brought.
Yeah. This is not what I wanted. I'm sorry. This is not the thing that I wanted. I'm a little rushed for time here. Let me just check. Well, I'll just tell you what the answer is. The real answer is that actually, maybe it's in the Beit Yosef a little bit. But the real answer is because of not bar not. In other words, if you cook milk and then water, it's not bar not tehetera. Well, we didn't really talk about not bar not, but we didn't learn not bar not. But not bar not means flavor that's gone through some process like water. Actually, we're gonna have to stop here. I see the time is up, but maybe we should have read the rest of this Beit Yosef Zion on your own, and you'll see that he kind of touches on this idea that he says it's all related to Hanan, but the other alternative is that it's just like we said at the beginning, that it's just Isser that's in there, and it becomes a new Isser. It's not that it becomes Hanan in the sense of Hanan is an issue of Kamut. Hanan says, I have to measure now when the water falls into another pot, I have to measure against all the water. That's Hanan. But here we're not talking about Hanan. We're talking about not Kamut, but Eichut, the quality of the water. Is the water Isser or not? And on that, everybody can agree that the water is Usser. So that's enough to revitalize the Tam. And it's not a din of Hanan, but it's just a din of the Eichut of the water. It's not a din of Hanan says the Kamut gets bigger. Here we're not saying the Kamut gets bigger. We don't need to say that. All we need to say is that there is flavor there, and therefore it restarts the clock. I'll leave it with that.
We can look at the Beit Yosef and the Chazar Shir if you want, Rav Nachum.
Good idea. Okay. All right. Yishukayach, everybody.
Thank you.
This is a very important siman, really. All these dins, like Joel said, it comes up a lot in Shilas. Devar Harif, boiling the waters, resetting the clock, and in general, Tam Gam. Okay. Next week we go to Siman Kuf Dalid, and we have a new teacher, a different teacher.
We'll be sending out sources probably either tonight or tomorrow.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Rav Nachum.
Thank you.